Welcome to Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things, the podcast show. I am your host, Carrie Roberts, and today I am joined by John Ramstead. So excited to have him here. Welcome. Thank you for being here, John.
Great to be here, Carrie. Thanks for what you're doing, too. Love listening to your podcast, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And, we're talking about purpose today. And I was curious for you because I think the word purpose is something that's a little bit newer. In the last maybe 10 or so years, we've really talked about it. Do you remember the first time that you heard the word purpose? Like, was it as a kid or was it later on? Where was the first time you kind of heard that word for you?
If I go all the way back, Carrie, I think it was my days in the military. So this is already back, late 80s, early 90s. And we always talked about, what is our purpose? What is that big picture and what is our mission? What are we doing? The missions that we do that lead toward a purpose. So that kind of laid the foundation. And then when Rick Warren came out with his book, A Purpose-Driven Life, I think like a lot of people, I read it. It didn't really connect when I was a little bit younger. Honestly, it didn't really connect to me at the time, but it started to plant a seed about having a bigger kind of vision and meaning to my life versus just what I was doing in the present.
Yeah, that's interesting that it was kind of a little bit later on. And you started kind of your professional career in the military. And I wanted to read something because you wrote something on your LinkedIn I loved. It was the 80s. So, of course, you said, you're watching Top Gun like so many did. We're still all waiting for the sequel to come out. And you said you knew, right? I know we're ready. You said, I knew two things, that this is what I had to do and that everyone with a pulse would be applying to Navy flight school. But then you later hear that for every 10,000 people that apply, that only one person would end up in the cockpit of an F-14 or F-18. And, you have the orders to go to Florida. And you write that your dad kind of gave you some of the best advice as a young man. And he said, find that one student in the naval aviation training person who's crushing it, buy him a beer, ask him questions, and you do that. And after learning from him, you become that person, that one person. So I would love for you to kind of start with that story because I think that's really interesting. That's something a lot of people hear, but they don't actually take the action to do. So can you kind of talk about that moment, what your dad really said, and how you were able to work with that individual that kind of maybe mentored you to be able to do the thing you wanted at that age?
Yeah, and let me bring you even back one step. When I'll never forget, I was in college with my girlfriend, and I see the movie Top Gun, and it'd been my dream since I was a kid. And when I saw that on the big screen, I actually walked out of that theater totally crushed because I looked up at that screen and I said, I can't do that. And I actually got back to college because I was on a Navy scholarship and didn't even apply for flight school. But then I realized I had this weight, I gave up on my dream. And my dad said, well, bet on yourself, try. And I ended up applying and getting into flight school. So think about all this baggage that I'm bringing in, fear of failure, fear of embarrassing myself, fear of, I don't know, all kinds of stuff. And I'm heading down to flight school and my dad can tell that I'm kind of stressed out pretty much. Yeah. And he pulled me aside and he says, John, when you get down there's going to be a student and they're going to be ahead of you. So you're not competing with them because he knows how the Navy works kind of by classes, by groups, and somebody who's way ahead of you, you're not competing for what we called selection. And he said, I'll guarantee you there'll be somebody everybody's talking about. And I get down to Pensacola and I remember what my dad said. And everyone was talking about this one guy. His name was John Foster. And nobody had ever seen somebody with his grades ever before. And so I just went up to him. I didn't know him. And I said, hey, John, man, I hear great things about you. Hey, can I buy you a beer sometime? I'd love to just hear what you're doing, how you're preparing, how you're thinking. And he goes, yeah, absolutely. He goes, do you know nobody's ever asked me that before? Think about this. All these folks, this community, I heard about his name as soon as I kind of got into flight school. And he shared with me how he thought, his mindset, how he prepared, what he did. And he started mentoring me. And just following what he did, which was kind of counterintuitive, quite frankly. It's kind of brilliant. But in doing that, Carrie, I graduated #1 in primary flight training. I was able to select for jet training, which is a very small number of people. And then in jet training, I graduated #1. I was able to choose to fly. I had my choice. Did I want to fly the F-14 or the F-18? And of course, I chose that monster, the F-14.
That is really exciting. And I wonder, when you were talking to this person again, who is mentoring you, coaching you, whatever you want to say, what did you notice he was doing differently? Was it a mindset thing? Was it a practice thing? I mean, I'm sure it's a bunch of stuff, but was there something that really stood out to you that you realized nobody else was doing as well as he was?
Two things. First of all, you know what he said to me is, you know what? It's not the best pilots that graduate #1. It is the best students. So think about his mindset. It's not about my talent. It's about my willingness to put in the work and learn and do more than other people are doing. Okay, I'm like, okay, great. And the second one was really interesting. He said, you know what? We're asked to do all these very demanding things in the cockpit, flying very precise maneuvers, and they are constantly trying to induce stress. They'll throw an emergency at you, or you're in the middle of doing a maneuver and they'll ask you, like, what's the hydraulic pressure? I mean, it was crazy stuff, but they were just trying to get you to stress out and just see if you could kind of handle what eventually became, flying combat missions, I was in Iraq and things like that. So he had me fly anything I could possibly ask, every procedure, any data, any stat. And I had a stack of probably about 1,000 3x5 cards. And I had them all mixed up in different categories in stacks of about 100. And he asked me, he goes, do you know how to juggle? I'm like, actually, I do. He goes, good. Because here's what you're going to do. You're going to juggle. And when you're juggling, you're going to get quizzed because you need to be doing something physical. Well, you have somebody quiz you. And if you get one wrong out of the stack, I don't care if you have 99 of those memorized, but you get one wrong, you do the stack over. And I did it every night. My girlfriend would be quiz me. My roommates would quiz me. And I got to the point in the cockpit where nothing rattled me because I was prepared. And that really helped me create this reputation that just helped me, I think, even if I did have a bad day, get the benefit of the doubt. And so things worked out pretty good.
I like that. We just met, but I am a dancer as well. So I understand that kind of physical component in terms of learning and using your brain and your mind. So I think that's really interesting. And, looking at kind of your trajectory professionally, you're in the military for a while, but then you're working for some technology companies and startups, and then you are at an executive level, you're working in finance, you go into coaching. When you kind of look at all of those things, and we're talking about this idea of purpose, was there something, again, at that time, before we get to kind of, I know you've been through an accident, we'll go through that, but was there anything that was kind of propelling you to the next level, to do the next thing that was kind of this internal purpose for you, or no?
Well, I was looking for something, before the accident. It's almost like two big chapters in my life. Yeah. Before the accident, Carrie, I was really looking for meaning in what I did. And here's how I describe it. I was living under the tyranny of they. I was trying to succeed according to how they defined it. My bosses, my family, the people around me. I wanted to show up the way they expected me to. I wanted to volunteer at the places they thought it'd be good for me to spend time at. Like, what I was trying to do was like build kind of almost like this resume and this business career and this persona of somebody successful out in the community. And when you're following somebody else's plan, not your own, I don't think there's ever a place in there that you're going to really not only find meaning, but any kind of really happiness or joy, because I was miserable. I describe it now, looking back on it, this place of smoldering discontent. And I couldn't tell you where it was at the time, why I had it, where it was from. And the only thing I knew how to do at the time to try to fill in these perceived holes was to even work harder, do more, start a nonprofit, take on responsibilities, coach the kids' schools. And what I found is I was even more miserable, but then I didn't know how to pull things back. I didn't know how to say no. And so, what I felt though at the time, it was almost like this whole concept of purpose was like this buried treasure. Like, either I wasn't worthy to have like something more meaningful, or like I wasn't equipped. Like, what do I need to do to be able to unearth this thing to kind of unlock like a life that was just felt a little more fully alive? And that was a period of time, my time that I think from the outside in, if you met me back then, be like, wow, he's doing great. He's pretty squared away. Behind the curtain, behind the mask, I was miserable. My marriage was suffering, and I was very unhappy.
I think that's very common. And it's interesting you talk about this concept of they, meaning it could be cultural, it could be from a parent, it could be a teacher. I actually have found people I've talked to that have been in the military feel this strong sense of they because maybe they've been taught for a long time, like this is what you do. And you're kind of directed every single way and kind of pushed to certain things. Do you think that came a little bit maybe from the military background at all, or still not really clear, just kind of just the overall feeling of they?
Well, I got to tell you, just growing up, just my family, I had one of those families where like you had to earn anything positive, right? If you like to get a hug, to get an I love you, to get any kind of recognition, you had to like do something to earn it. And then it didn't come again until you did something else that was noteworthy. And, the military is pretty recognition based. I've been in, some of the leaders I had in the military were not that way. They were amazing, like meritocracies and this culture of servant leadership. And those are some of my favorite places. But yeah, I think it was definitely ground into me as a kid. Like if I want somebody to say, you know what, John, you have worth, you're liked, you have value, I would have to earn those words versus getting those from somebody seeing my inherent worth or value just because of who I was.
And how long did it take you to become aware that was happening for you?
Oh, not till after the accident. I had to spend a couple years in the hospital rebuilding every element of my entire life.
So let's go to that accident before we kind of go deeper into this. So as you were saying, you're going through this life, and on the outside it kind of seems successful and you have it together, but on the inside, and personally just things are just not working and kind of falling apart. You decide, okay, I'm going to take a little break for a moment. And the accident happened from horseback riding. So I'd love for you to talk about, where was your mindset before this happened? And then what happened in this accident, and then kind of take us from there.
Yeah, I think the mindset was, hey, I need to do more. I think it was definitely that mindset. Well, I don't know, smoldering discontent a mindset? Or is it, I think it's just a symptom of somebody who just does not have their priorities straight. You know what I did? I didn't know who I was.
Yeah.
Right. Like I didn't really know, like, who is that best version of myself? Because I don't think unless you connect to that, it's really then, if you don't have that, it's really hard to figure out what you should be doing and then your why and these things around purpose and meaning. And so what happened was I was here. I'd moved to Colorado in 2008 and gotten very involved in a lot of different nonprofits and got invited to a retreat. And I flew up from Denver up to Great Falls, Montana on a Thursday. And now Friday, it was just a small group, 14 or 15, just some really neat people. It was exciting to be around. And we were going to go horseback riding to the back of this property and have lunch and get to know each other. And I'm the first one saddled on this horse. Are you a horse person, Carrie? I know you're.
I am not a horse. I have done one time horseback riding when I was 13. It was not a great experience. I had no training. So that was one time. So no, I don't know much about it.
Okay, so that's kind of, my background too. Well, all of a sudden my horse just starts trotting, which is really uncomfortable. But then he bolts and he takes off, and I'm laying flat on my back, and his rump is pounding me in the shoulder blades, and I was scared to death I was going to flip off the back of this horse and get kicked in the head and get killed. So I did the one thing I knew to do, so I didn't flip off, and I squeezed with my legs as hard as I possibly could. And like, I'm a guy, so I didn't read the manual. And what I found out is that is telling the horse to go faster. And this guy found another gear. He hit the afterburners. And I get my weight back up on the horse, and I'm looking out ahead of me, and there's this big, long steel corral fence. and we're going faster, and we're going faster, and we're getting closer. And I'm literally incredulous. I've flown in combat. I've been shot at, and nothing prepared me for that moment. My thoughts completely spun out of control. And I'll never forget, about 20 yards in front of the fence, I just had this massive adrenaline rush, and time just slows down. And I remember thinking to myself, this is not going to end well. And that is the last thing I remember. The horse came into the fence, and he bucked so hard, he flipped over and slammed into the fence rump first on his side. And when he did that, he launched me Superman straight into the top 3-inch rolled steel beam. And it completely crushed my skull, caved the top left part of my skull in. I broke every bone in my skull except my jaw and my right cheekbone. I broke my neck.
Where was everybody else? Nobody else saw this, or
well, I was
leader
the first one
it?
Saddled. So think about me. I'm back over here. I'm the first one saddled, and they're all kind of getting on their horses. And then my horse just takes off. Huh. So basically, as soon as they watched this whole thing. So they see the horse take off. It was about 80 yards away when this accident happened. They saw the horrific sound of me hitting the fence and this big cloud of dust. And they ran over, and because I woke up on the ground and I could feel people holding me down, my head, my shoulders, and my hips. And thank goodness, because I broke C2 and C4 in my neck. I shattered the base of my skull, but I'm standing and walking today. I have no spinal cord damage. I think had they not gotten there and I was flailing around in this pain that I woke up into, I'd probably be talking to you from a wheelchair today. So
I will tell you that you are not the first person that I have interviewed that has been through this craziness and have lived and walked and been fine. So it's impressive to me. Did you feel, because I'm sure that was a long recovery, but was there or is there a moment to you of like, this is a second chance? This is a moment that I have to adjust. I have to change. Was it obviously it's a life-changing moment, but was there anything that made you think like this could have been way worse? There's a reason that I maybe went through this, or that I'm okay. Was there anything that kind of crossed your mind about that?
Well, yes. What happened was when I woke up and could feel their hands, I was in more pain that the second bar down, by the way, crushed my entire rib cage. I had broken ribs that punctured my lung. This was bad. Yeah. We were told later, Carrie, by multiple doctors, what happened to me was not survivable, just because there was so much brain damage. They did a SPECT scan of my brain at some point, and there was like over 35% of my brain that literally had no blood flow. This was literally not survivable, what happened. So this pain that I was in, you know that saying, God won't give you more than you can handle? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's not true. I'm just telling you right there, not true. Okay. And I am like on the ground, screaming, writhing, trying to get away from this pain. They're holding me down. And all of a sudden, one of the guys said, hey, I just watched you just relax so completely. It looked like you were sinking into the ground. He goes, I thought I just watched you die. And it was in that moment, Carrie, that, and I can go as deep into this as you want, but I was in God's presence. He was standing right next to me. And all of a sudden, what was flowing from him, it was just emanating. It was in waves. It had a physical weight to it, like waves in an ocean washing over my body of just unconditional love. Because when I first felt it, I remember thinking, as soon as I felt it, that I wasn't worthy of somebody loving me like that. And as soon as that was washing over me, all that pain and panic and fear was completely taken away. And then God spoke to me. And, I didn't even know this, not where I was at the time. I didn't even know this came from the Bible, but he said, all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. And then he said, John, I'm going to heal you and use this for my glory. And he said, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And as soon as he said that, I knew with certainty that my left eye was completely blind, which it is permanently. All the bones behind the eye socket had shattered and severed the optic nerve. And then I woke up and I calmly said to everybody, I said, hey, you don't have to worry. It's going to be okay. And the woman next to me is a paramedic, and she's been in Montana for 30 years, and she saw this, my head caved in. She's like, yeah. She told her husband who was there, like, he's not going to make it till life flight gets here in an hour.
Yeah.
Like, what do we, and then go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I want to go back for a second because, your initial response is, I'm not worthy of love. Where did that come from? Where was that, deep inside coming from? Was it the kind of parent thing you talked about earlier? Was it not following a purpose? What was going on? Do you think at that moment that innate feeling was, I'm not worthy of love?
Well, you know what it was? I wasn't worthy of this level of, it was unconditional, which I had never, I'd read about, I'd heard about, but as a human, we just don't experience it. You might get it from your golden retriever, right? But we don't get it from other people. And what I knew in that moment, as soon as I felt it, that anything and everything I had ever done in my past, good, bad, ugly, was not even relevant to this love and this relationship that was there. And I had never felt that from anybody in my life. And I know that today it doesn't matter what I do. There's nothing I can do to affect that love in that relationship. And to actually know that the God of the universe cared about me as a person individually and loved me without condition absolutely blew my mind. It was transformative in that moment because, in the past, growing up, going to Bible school or Sunday school, things like that, I had never connected the dots on that for me. And to understand that actually somebody cared about me, who was involved in creating me and knitting me together, for me was changed everything about how I saw myself and the world, quite frankly, Carrie.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting concept. And again, like you said, having to been through that process, it would make sense why you would have such a deep understanding of it. So now you wake up, you're physically not okay, but you're like, I'm going to be fine, as you tell this paramedic. What is kind of, obviously you have a physical journey to recovery, but what is the mental journey for you in terms of, I'm going to change how I feel about life. I'm going to change what matters to me. What did that kind of look like for you in that recovery stage?
Well, I think it was a few days after the accident. I was in ICU for 5 weeks and then at a specialty hospital with a brain injury for 20 months after I got out of ICU. But I'll never forget, I had post-traumatic amnesia. So those 5 weeks in the ICU, I think I have about 3 memories. But one of them is the neurosurgeon walks into my room and they have to do a craniotomy. They basically have to take off my whole skull to fix all this damage. And my wife is in the room sitting next to me, and he starts describing the surgery, not to me, but to her. Here's what I'm hearing is the chances of me surviving this are not great. And the chances of me being the person that she remembers, it's not good. And then he looks at my wife and asked her if I have a will, and more importantly, a living will. Which Carrie, we just redone it, and I was supposed to actually sign it the week after I got back from this trip. And she's telling that to the doctor, and he says, well, listen, I want you to get that from your attorney, have it faxed up here or whatever, and we'll have John sign it before the surgery, which is what they did. But so they both leave the room. Now, even though I just had this experience, I was convinced of one thing, that next weekend was my funeral. And I'm laying in the bed. I remember looking down and counting because I had 7 IVs in my arms, believe it or not. I don't know I don't even know, like, what could you do with 7? But anyway, that's a whole nother topic. But I remember thinking, you know what? I started playing the tape. And at first it was kind of fun. It felt pretty good because guess what? Who do you invite to a funeral? Who gets to speak? People that say good things, right? But then I started thinking, hey, what would they say at the back of the church? Like, we got introduced by our friend Bryson, or maybe you knew me. And you start chatting, and as you're rooting around for the, fried chicken and, potato salad. And what's the real conversation? And then I started thinking, hey, what if it was a year later or 2 years later? What's the conversation? Oh, what was that? What a bummer. What was that? What was his wife's name again? Anyway, yeah. So Carrie, how's business? How's life? Right? I think I've been an afterthought for most people because I worked hard. I was doing a lot of things, but I wasn't doing anything that really created a legacy. And I was convicted in that moment, Carrie, that you know what? I have this amazing second chance to rewrite my script and live a life so the use of my life would outlive my life. And I started thinking, what is it? Where would I start? What is that obituary if it had happened? What I really want people to say. And I got to tell you, as I recovered, and it was a very recovery, I had a massive brain injury that was really hard on my wife. She was my caregiver for 2 years. But I actually, what I did is I sat down talking about purpose, and this is such a powerful exercise for me. I wrote down what I want her to say someday. And I wrote down what I want each of my boys to say. And I wrote down what I want some of my family members, closest friend, colleagues at work to say someday, people I haven't even met. And I've never shared that with any of them because I want to live a life so that those words are said, but they're not scripted. Like one of the things in my obituary for my wife, and it says that I want her to say that I always felt like the most loved woman in the world. Right. And I don't measure up to that most days, but it is a aspirational goal. But I got to tell you what, I've shared it with some of my closest friends, and I've said, you know what, these are some things that are really important to me. And I give you permission to ask me about it. Right. And a few weeks ago, my friend called and says, hey, does Donna feel like the most loved woman in the world today? Like, oh, dude, why'd you call today? Like, all right, I got to fix some stuff. I'll get back to you. But but you know what? When I realized, here's the crazy thing, right? I was given this second chance, Carrie.
Yeah.
And it was really stark. I mean, like I should not be here. I should not be breathing, literally, physically. That is not hyperbole, by the way. I can show anybody all the medical records if you have, because I've had people question that. But every day before the accident was a second chance. Every day before the accident, I had the power to rewrite my script. I just didn't realize it. And I missed it day after day after day. I almost kind of had deceived myself that I had to show up a certain way and do certain things and work certain hours. And I got to tell you, the freedom that came from understanding that I can actually own my purpose, become the best version of myself, and then live out a life that brings the two of those together was, even though everything got taken away. I mean, I had no income for 2.5 years. I had all my bills. My health was gone. After I got discharged from the hospital after 2 years, I could literally only work about 8 or 10 hours a week because of my brain injury. I had no energy, no focus. Yeah. And my network was dormant. I'd literally been in a bed for 2 years. I had a few close friends that stayed close. I had some of my friends that couldn't stand seeing me as I recovered. I was a different person, quite frankly, and they couldn't handle it. And at first that was really painful. But then I also realized, kind of like my backstory and some things about growing up that I haven't shared, right? Everybody has a story. And you know what? We all bring that into every situation because it's about who we are. And you know what? My friend a couple of friends that just couldn't be around me as I was recovering, I don't know what that might have meant. It might have been really painful to them, and it had nothing to do with me. And when I started looking at, inside of every single person is a beautiful person with an incredible backstory, and I'm going to just make a choice to give them the grace that I would hope that they would give me if I made a mistake. And in that, I've made some of the most amazing relationships. And I'm living a life now, because the accident was 9 years ago, at a level that I honestly didn't think was possible before the accident.
Well, I congratulate you. I think that's wonderful. I just want to say Ava's also clapping for you as well. I think, you had talked about this idea of like, there's always a second chance. And it is very common that when people go through something traumatic, that they change or they adjust their life how they want it to be. But prior to that, they always say, at some point, or I just have to do this, or they make an excuse of, well, this is who I am. That's how, they understand their backstory and that's who I am. but they either don't know how to change or they don't want to change. How do you tap into not having to go through something traumatic? Because of course nobody wants to go through something like that, but to get the mindset into, if I want to live the life I want to live and I want to find that purpose for myself, like something has to change, and it only comes from inside. So what is your suggestion to get people to do that?
Okay, so what you just described was this mindset I was stuck in, and that is creating dependent events. Right? I got to get ready to get ready. Hey, when I finally make a little bit more money, I can. Mm-hmm. Right? Think about this, our language, right? You know what that does? That prevents us. That is language that stops us from finding any kind of joy or meaning in the present. I mean, just if we are talking that way, and when I'm a coach now, one of the things I listen for every time I'm with a client is what is the language they use and what's the tense that it's in. But I want everybody to think about this. You talked about the 3 keys to owning your purpose. Yep. Here's what they are, I think. Right. The first one is, think about this. You guys all, like, you take out your iPhone and you're going to go drive to a friend's house you haven't been to yet. Right. And you pull out your phone. What's the first thing you do when you pull up Apple Maps? What is it, Carrie? What's the first thing you do when you want to go to a friend's house?
I type in the address of where I want to go.
Exactly.
There's a direction.
It doesn't work unless you give it a destination. So here's a question for us as humans. We have to know, what is our destination? Like, it could be short term. Here's a simple question for folks out there. Let me ask you this. Let's just say that you could wave a realistic magic wand. So you didn't just win the lottery, but hey, you could win something realistic. What would you love to be celebrating or talking about in your life a year from now? What would be going on in your relationships, professionally, personally, spiritually, emotionally, whatever it happens to be? What are some of those things? Because now you have something to start aiming toward. Like, for me, it's hard for me to think 3 and 5 and 10 years out. I can think past that, but those shorter terms for me are a little bit harder. Now, the second thing is, this is why I hope Waze is not one of your sponsors, Carrie. This is why I don't use Waze anymore. Have you ever you pull up your phone and you type in that address, and now it's time to go see your buddy, your friend, and it doesn't know where you're at.
Yeah. And
you turn the wrong way, and then you're like, oh goodness, now I got a looper. I just added 8 minutes to my stupid trip. So you know what? You have to know where you're starting from. We have to know our own present position. And I think that is for us getting clarity on our core values. What are we passionate about? What are we good at? What are our experience and our strengths? And in my book, I talk about this place of convergence where all these come together. But like when I was flying in combat, right? If we had to make a course correction, I had to get to a place to help troops on the ground. I had to know exactly where I was at and exactly where I was going to be able to make a course correction. Because here's an interesting fact for you. When you're flying on an airliner, last time you were flying and you're comfortably up at altitude and the crew's got autopilot on, what percent of time do you think the airplane is on course?
I have no idea. All I think about is just hoping we land safely. I have no idea. I would assume it has to be on course because when I look at that map and there's so many going in different directions, it would have to be staying in a position where it's going or stay idle. Would it?
Right. Okay. So your assumption is, we're pretty much on course all the time. I mean, that's what the autopilot does, right?
Right.
Do you know you're on course less than 3% of the time?
Really?
Uh-huh. Now
what is it doing?
Think about this. That airplane, just like our life, is constantly being pushed off course. When you feel turbulence, those are actually wind gusts. Mm-hmm. And the engines are turning and you're burning fuel and people are going up to go to the bathroom. I mean, the airplane is constantly, if that autopilot wasn't making constant little course corrections, right, it gets off course and it corrects back. And we have to do the same thing in our life. And I don't think, if we don't know our true north, where we're going and where we're at right now, it makes it very, very hard to make a course correction. And that's like me taking off from New York City, trying to go to Hawaii. And I didn't know any of this stuff. And I end up a couple 1,000 miles north and I run out of fuel. That's kind of where I was before the accident, because I wasn't in touch with these things. When I did that, all of a sudden, and here's what's foundational, though, I think for anybody listening too, and this was for me. You remember that sense of purpose that I felt like was this elusive treasure hunt?
Yeah.
After the accident, what I realized was this person who I was not who I wanted to be. And I became acutely aware that the person I saw in the mirror was very different person than that best version of myself, the person I was created to be. And as I did this journey of understanding what was important, where I wanted to go, and who I was, I started closing this gap between my real self and my ideal self. What I realized is the bigger that gap is, it shows up directly in our lives by, I think, the amount of anxiety and stress and ambiguity that we feel. And when we start to close this gap and we start to get to understand who we are as the best version of ourselves, all of a sudden that whole idea of purpose just came into focus. And it was right in front of me. And what I realized was, in the past, I was doing it backwards. I was trying to figure out the purpose and then become the person that people wanted me to do to get to what I thought was important. When I got in touch with who I really was, because I'm in the leadership world, and I think that the industry does a huge disservice to folks, because we focus on the why and the what and the how, right? Purpose, meaning, vision. Those are very important. But here's the thing: is it's underneath that. At the core, the foundation is who we are. Because Carrie, you've accomplished some incredible things in your life and your knowledge. And let's just say you wanted to come in and work with me on my branding and my messaging and my business growth as an entrepreneur. And you had me and you had another version of me. And one person was really healthy as a person. The other person, not so much. Right? We could probably get, with the same information, probably two very different results, right?
Yes.
And you've probably seen that with your clients, haven't you?
Yes. I just want to go back for a second, because I think one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm sure you have too, working in the business leadership space, is a lot of people, and I've done this in the past too, where you put purpose with work, that the two have to be together. And as I've gotten older, I've realized they don't have to be one and the same, but there's this feeling that it has to be. What are your thoughts on that?
I almost kind of think of it separately. I think they can be aligned, but if you think about it, right, I think I think of almost in alignment this way. What's my vision, right? That is that big picture. What do I want to be known for, right? Almost think of that like my brand, right? What is that brand identity? And somebody says, hey, do you know Carrie? Yeah, this is what I think about, right? I can craft that. My purpose is, I think, my why, right? So why am I at work? I think of the work, like what I'm doing right now, is almost my mission, and that is what I do. And I think there's a big difference between, what I do and why I do it. And so, part of, my question for a lot of folks is, not only, what are, when you get really connected with what you want to create, who you want to be, what's the impact you want to have? It could be just in your family. It could be just as a mom or a dad, or it could be something bigger. But what are you willing to do that other people are not willing to do to get those results? Like when I met John Foster all the way back, our first story we talked about, he sat down and put a amazing amount of thought into how to get the results that he wanted. And he talked to people and he sought mentorship. And I'm very fortunate that he's also the kind of guy that was open to share that, right? Yeah. But he did some things that I know, like all my friends, I would share with my friends in flight school. This thing kind of shocked me. Everybody said they wanted jets. And I shared with all my friends what I was doing and what John was teaching me. Do you know how many of those friends put in the same amount of work that John was doing? None. And that's a question. To get the different results you want in your life, what are we willing to do? And I think to go through that, especially as an entrepreneur, building this coaching business coming out of this accident, we've had some great times and some really challenging times. Understanding why I'm doing it and what's the reason behind that is what, for me, allows me to keep taking those small steps every day forward as an entrepreneur to keep going through some of those difficult times. Without that, I probably would have made a pivot and done something else.
Yeah. And I like that you're talking about, the why versus the what, because it's funny because some people will look at my professional resume and be like, whoa, you're all over the place. You've done so many different things, like pick something. And I always laugh because I'm like, but actually I'm doing the same thing, just a different vertical. It's the same why, it's the same way I do stuff. And I look at that as an advantage. So I think it's interesting. You have some that have done the same thing and their passion and purpose and work have lined up, but some of it's kind of a mix. So I like that you're pointing that out because I think it's important to note. I think a lot of people feel the pressure to have a purpose and work be the same and it be one thing and line up with kind of the they that you mentioned earlier. So it really is kind of going in. So I just want to go through one more time these kind of 3 keys just to kind of mention, just to kind of sum up here that people can kind of be thinking about in terms of owning their own purpose.
Yeah, so the first one is your true north. A big part of that for me is my faith, as you guys have heard. But for a lot of people too, I think also what's core of that is your self-identity. And what your identity really is, it's what you believe to be true about yourself. And a simple asking the question is that stuff you believe to be true, is it really true? Because what I found is there's a lot of stuff that I had let in that was not true. And I had to pull that stuff out to get clear so I could actually see that North Star. Second one is, what is that destination? Like if you're married, right? Like for me, I've been married 31 years. I want to have an amazing marriage. I also have goals for my business. What does my business look like by the end of the year? So I think it's really important for us to be actually looking at what we want to create, who we want to be. And then we have to figure out what is our starting point. And the other thing I would just share with people, Carrie, too, is another concept that confused me. It's kind of back to the dependent events from before. Is I used to want to get clarity to be able to take action. Okay, I got to figure out really who I am and really where I want to go, and then I'll start making some steps forward. What I found that doesn't work, and actually the opposite is true, is that actual action begets clarity. It's counterintuitive, but that action actually begets that clarity that you're looking for. If you're listening right now, that you need to take action. So my whole mantra as I was in this mode and I had very little capacity was, what is one small thing that I can do today to work on one of those areas? That was my goal, just one small thing every day. And now, I guess I've been out of the hospital now for about 7 years. So now 7 years later, small step at a time, we now have a team of 16 people. We do work literally all over the world. We've been named the preferred leadership trainer to the military. Like, doors have opened that to this day blow my mind. And it's just been a lot of series of small steps with some highs and lows. And you know what? The other thing I would tell people too is this kind of work, it's kind of some deep work. Don't do it alone. It is a team sport. Work with a coach like Carrie. Have a group of other people that are on the same journey. Some may be a little bit ahead of you, and maybe some people are a little behind you. But guess what? We're going to mess up. We're going to have bad days, and we need to have people to turn to encourage us and help us, tomorrow to take that next small step tomorrow.
I appreciate that. And I love your note about the clarity thing. I love clarity. And I agree. Sometimes it's taking action because you find what you don't want. And that's equally as valuable. Like, oh, it's not this. Let's get back on the course. So I appreciate you saying that as well. If people want to learn more about anything we talked about, they want to get your new book out, they want to connect with you, where is the best place to do that?
Just go to beyondinfluence.com. Love for you guys to connect with me there. Beyondinfluence.com/book is about our new book, On Purpose with Purpose, that just came out, which really chronicles this whole journey. A lot of things we talked about here, but I wrote it in a way that somebody could actually go through this whole process without having to hire a coach. I just wanted to help more people get to this life fully alive that I've been able to get to that I did not even think was possible before I went through this whole journey.
Well, I thank you so much, John. I congratulate you on your own progress and continued journey towards even more of your purpose. And I thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thanks for having me, Carrie. You rock. Keep knocking them alive out there.